talk about it. Tell me all about it. I'm here. I want to know what's on your mind. Ooh, the world needs to hear from you, and I'm so glad to have a conversation to reach the nation. And it's all about you. We'll help each other to discover innovative ways to positively change the world. Let's talk about, let's talk about, let's talk about Conversations with Nicole.
Greetings, good evening. Welcome to Conversations with Nicole. I am Nicole Everett, your host, and Conversations with Nicole is a talk show based in Tallahassee, Florida, focused on connecting the community through conversations. And this is what I call Wellness Wednesday. Wellness Wednesday is an opportunity for you and me and my guests to have a conversation, an interactive conversation. So we are highlighting Black and Brown clinicians talking about mental health and wellness, trying to normalize that conversation. So we are live on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Roku TV via the Greater Works Network. So tell your friends, your family members, get on, tune in, lean in, because we have got a great conversation for you tonight. But before I bring my guest on, who is Dr. Chad Lennon, I want to hear from you. This is interactive. I expect to hear from you all evening long. So please, in the comments, let us know where you are tuning in from, where you're tuning in from. Put your city and state in the comments so that we can give you a shout out. Yes. All right. I see you. Rashonda Macon in Tallahassee. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. So tonight we are talking about how to help your children, your child, your youth, your young one, manage stress. How to help them manage stress. All right, so I see you, Princess. Good evening. Thanks for being here. We have Joy Tubman Wells from Ellicott City, Maryland. All right, thank you for tuning in. Miss Micah, thank you for tuning in. Tallahassee. Candace Johnson, Jersey City. Love it. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you all being here. And Mr. Ozzy from Virginia Beach. Ozzy is also a clinician. Thank you for being here, Ozzy. So we are in for truly a treat tonight. Thank you, Laura from Tallahassee. Mr. Dr. Chad. Dr. Chad, actually, his brother-in-law is my FAMU freshman brother. So I got to give a shout out to Oscar Scott, also known lovingly by, his peeps is Scotty Scott. So thank you, Oscar, for helping to make this connect. That FAMU, that Rattler Nation connection is strong. So I appreciate that. So let me introduce Dr. Chad Lennon. He has been the lead psychiatrist of the Adolescent Unit for Advent's Behavioral Health, Shady Grove Medical Center in Rockville, Maryland, since August 2016. After graduating from Franklin and Marshall College in 2003, he took a roundabout route to Howard University College of Medicine. My son is a Bison, as he spent 3 years in New York City and Long Island, taking both post-baccalaureate classes and working for Leake and Watts Residential Treatment Center and Young Adults Institute, both moving him forward into working with children and young adults. He completed his residency in psychiatry at the University of Maryland, Sheppard Pratt, and Child and Adolescent Fellowship at Mount Sinai Elmhurst Hospital Center. Throughout his career, he has enjoyed his experiences educating and teaching others through experiences, including being a mentor, educator through the Young Docs DC, doing a mission trip to Haiti, and being a part of the introductory team of the New Freedmen's Clinic through Howard University College of Medicine. He has continued that educational spirit through numerous presentations, blogs, and articles, and the list goes on and on. So help me welcome my special guest, Dr. Chad Lennon.
Yay! I'll even clap for myself. Yay! Yay.
Yay!
I figured you did the introduction where you were dancing by yourself, so I should be able to clap for myself, right?
That's all right. Yes, yes. So, welcome, Dr. Chad. Thank you for being
Of
here.
course, my pleasure.
Tell the folks, who are you? Not what you do, because I just read all of that, but who is Chad,
um,
Dr. Chad Lennon?
so much within all of that. So I now, as I said, as was stated, I work in Rockville, Maryland, but I live in Ellicott City, so that's a suburb a little
Oh,
bit outside of Baltimore, about maybe less than an hour away from it. And before COVID kind of put kind of kibosh, I was adamant of doing, like, I like to watch a lot of theaters and dinner shows and stuff like that. So me and my wife have spent a lot of time doing that. I'm also um in my day an avid bowler, and but really nowadays, everything being inside, it's a lot of just trying to find opportunities to relax, even if it's just watching television. For better or for worse, I'm an avid Hallmark movie watcher.
hmm.
So that's something I do on the side. My wife, for what is it, almost 3 years now, and we have a 1.5-year-old daughter that keeps us more busy than ever. Um, and luckily enough, over the years, I have family in Long Island and New York City. And recently, a few months ago, my mom moved from Long Island here to Maryland as well. So I have cousins here, and then my mother just recently moved here. So I'm lucky enough to be in a lot of places where I've had family contacts and connections as well.
Nice, nice, nice,
Yeah.
nice. Yes, I had the opportunity of meeting Miss Harriet the other day,
Yes.
1.5-year-old, and
She makes a presence.
is
She
as
makes her
cute as she
presence
wants to
known.
be. So, yes, I'm sure she keeps y'all busy.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. So, tell us a little bit about what drew you to being a child and adolescent psychiatrist.
Sure. It was kind of an interesting path. I would say and I'd love to tell people this story because I always like to ask, what got you into this? So my story of being a psychiatrist really starts with my very own doctor. And as a pediatrician, I would go to see him, and he would have this really cool fish tank in his office. And so I would ask myself at a young age, what do I need to do to get that? And so, in an effort to get that fish tank, which I unfortunately still don't have, which is kind of sad, that's what started off my career as being a doctor. And in my path of being a doctor, I've always wanted to be a pediatrician. I felt really um, excited about connecting to adolescents and kids. And so as the years went on, I felt like psychiatry was a place that provides that opportunity to really get to know kids and really get to understand them, and understand how they think and how they process. It was kind of interesting. Even in high school, I didn't even know that psychiatry even existed. Like,
Mhm.
I would talk to friends in high school who were dealing with their own struggles, ADHD and depression and anxiety, which happens a lot still to this day in adolescence. And some of my friends would say, hey, there's this other doctor of being a psychiatrist. I said, what?
Mm.
And so they described it to me as, like, they really kind of help with mental health issues and they really connect to people. I was like, well, that's what I'm looking for. And so that became my path going forward. And I've never strayed from it since. And I'm really glad that I've continued that path.
Nice, 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 nice. Okay,
Yeah.
good deal. So before we get started, I gotta read a little disclaimer,
Yeah, sure.
just for legal purposes. All topics past and present on Conversations with Nicole are for informational purposes only. They are not to be used as diagnosis for treatment or an answer to any personal issues related to the topic being discussed before, during, or after the program. So, in other words, get with the licensed clinician. Okay. So, we are just providing information here. All right. So, how to help your child manage stress?
Mhm.
Let's dive in.
All right. Where would you like to start?
Well, um, you know, we talking about kids. Like, what do kids have to stress about?
Right, because, we take care of them, there's no problems, right? They live a
Right.
life, they only have to go to school and come home and do their work and everything's fine.
You would think.
You would think,
Mm,
but in my experience over the years, and even thinking back to when I was an adolescent myself, realizing, like, there's a lot of pressures of being a kid and an adolescent, and even more so these days.
mhm.
And I'm aging myself when I say school isn't what it used to be. There's
Okay.
definitely a lot of more pressures and a lot more expectations of what kids are expected to be able to learn in school and how they're expected to follow through. So school provides a pressure.
Mm,
Unfortunately, home provides a pressure too.
mhm,
And in both ways. There's kids there who really want to make sure they please their parents and they really respect their parents. And so when they have experiences where they feel like it's not going according to plan, that can lead some to some levels of anxiety and depression.
mhm,
On the other hand, sometimes home is a very negative environment. So they leave the very put together, positive environment of school and they go to home that's extremely chaotic,
mhm,
unorganized, and many times they may not feel like they have anyone to go to there. So, that's another level of pressures that they have to deal with and concerns theirs at home.
mhm,
And, you know, the other place that they have a lot of struggles is just in their relationships.
mhm,
Adolescence is the prime time, as those who have kids who know, where that's where they really start to really see the importance of friends. And to maybe the chagrin of parents, their friends are going to be more important than their parents. And so a
mhm,
lot of times that can provide a lot of positivity. They have positive friends to get them up and moving and doing stuff with, and they have camaraderie and all that, those sort of things. But at the same time, they also may struggle in understanding relationships. It may be the time that adolescents, especially the time when they have their first boyfriend, girlfriend, or,
mhm,
greater than platonic and romantic relationship, and they struggle to kind of process what that means. Sometimes they just struggle in really getting connected with friends and with even adults as adolescents. As little kids, they struggle with some of these things too, trying to connect to people and understand how people work. So unfortunately, kids struggle at home, kids struggle at school, and kids struggle out in the world with peers. And if you put that all together, that's everything.
It is. So it just dawned on me when you said that they, you know, are maybe trying to understand how to uh, have relationships or friendships, especially if maybe their parents aren't friendly in the household. Maybe they're
Mhm.
not friendly towards one another or even
Right.
friendly towards the child.
Mhm.
Um, I could see that being kind of an awkward space to be in, trying to
Yeah.
understand what that means to be a friend or to have a friend.
And it's not always I think when I said that, many people were thinking like, oh my gosh, this really abusive person is at home. And sometimes it's not really that. It
Hmm.
could be a really well meaning parent who's not necessarily abusive, but
Hmm.
just hasn't figured out the best way to communicate with their child,
Yes.
or hasn't quite figured out how to manage negative behaviors with their child. And so
Mhm.
the child may not have, or adolescent may not have, a really good understanding of how to manage friendships and relationships. And so they go to school with just a lack of understanding and a lack of education about how to do that. And so it can be really a trying experience on how to be able to create friends when you don't have that basis of how to do it.
Right.
And no parent is perfect, so I don't want to put that out there and say we all need to do XYZ. I think I'd say 90% of the parents try their best
Hmm.
to produce a child that'll be a great citizen in the world, and but at the same time, we're not perfect. And so sometimes the kids may pick up on some of those imperfections and they'll carry that with them, and they struggle to be able to understand that, yeah, that's not quite the best way to do that. There's a better way. And so in the midst of that, they can struggle.
So that's a good segue to the first question of the evening
Yeah.
by Jackson Jr. Jackson.
Hmm.
How do you help a child that is in an abusive home, especially when that child is in a household where his or her father is beating their mother?
Yeah. If obviously I'm assuming that this is coming from a person who's not in the household, is it outside the household.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that you got to be aware of is there is a agency called Child Protective Services. And so if you definitely feel like that child is giving you information that is seen as they're clearly getting very much abused, you need to contact that agency. And usually those agencies can be found online. It's based in counties. So that should be the first step. If you have clear evidence, especially if they're telling you these things, if they have proof of injuries, Child Protective Services is where you want to call. They'll take your information down and they'll figure out kind of the next steps of how to handle that. And it's really important that that should be one important step. As an outsider, the second thing you could do is really help that child find a space that they can talk to someone about these things. And it doesn't, I always tell people that therapy is good for everybody, so if that child or that adolescent is willing to talk to somebody, then that's definitely something you want to try to advocate for, either for the to the child themselves or even for the parent. And we could talk a little bit about how to communicate that with the parents, but that's also an important avenue is to help them find a safe place. If it's with a clinician or a therapist, that's great. If they find the first entryway with you or with, a teacher at school or some adult that they confide in, that's also good. It just has to be someone that they know, that's an adult that they can communicate with. And then, of course, thirdly, it's really about, as they're communicating their feelings to you, to just be present. It's not about always immediately have to solve every problem. Obviously, you want to get them into the process where if they're in a highly abusive place, again, CPS is where you want to go to help advocate to get them out of that abusive space. But if there is also an opportunity that they just really need to talk to someone as they're kind of dealing with this, or, helping them process and helping them understand why CPS is the best place to go, sometimes it's just a matter of being that avid listener. So yeah, and like I said, it's if your sense is that the family may need some attention and some conversation, at least to get the child into therapy, it's always good to reach out to the parents and as an adult to comment about your concerns,
Mm-hmm.
and at least let them know that there's people out there that can help talk to them, and and helping them to at least get to the process of having the child see a therapist and maybe even the parent seeing a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Okay, we actually have another question.
Okay.
Sherry, who's right here in Tallahassee, she said,
All
how do you
right.
help someone that is 23 but has no friends? She has even attended college and still no friends. She is sweet, quiet, and very shy.
Sure. One of the things I typically tell a lot of people who have struggle of starting relationships, even friendships, platonic friendships, is to start with trying to find something that you're interested in and seeing if there's a club or organization that does that too. And in college, there's usually tons of clubs, and whether it's clubs based on your religion, clubs based on your race, clubs based on even what academic thing you like to do, whether it's, the philosophy club, the math club, things like that. There's always those sort of organizations and clubs that could get you started to going in somewhere. And if you're not finding those in college, then it may be a matter of working with that person to try to find them in the community, even if it's at a local YMCA or something like that. But that's how I usually tell people to start building relationships, is building friendships, is to start off with some activity that you really like and sort of try to connect yourself to a place that does that. And from there, that usually can help people feel a little bit more comfortable on talking to people. They may need help in learning, icebreakers and those sort of things. And but at least that's a starting point that they can go to somewhere that hopefully they feel connected and be able to connect to other people. If it gets to the point that they really still can't find that outlet there, then it could also be a matter of looking into many different, and you feel like it's a matter of like anxiety or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's many times a mental health clinic sometimes has groups, and
Okay.
they'll have like social anxiety groups, or they'll have groups of people who are all dealing with depression, or groups like that too. So for some people, that's an avenue as well. If it is purely seen as like, okay, the reason why they're not doing this is because there's a mental health issue there.
Good answers. I didn't know that those type of groups existed.
And I mean, they're not everywhere. You
Right.
do have to do a little bit of research, but there's many. Like the place that I work has um, like a coping skills group for
Mm-hmm.
adolescents and for even adults. It has a people dealing with death, bereavement sort of group. So there may be some clinics and organizations in your community that has some groups.
Right. Okay. I'm definitely putting that down as uh, um an option or
Yeah.
a source. So,
Yep.
so she
And
said,
even like doing clubs and stuff, you always want to make sure that that person has the interest first.
right.
You don't just want to say, okay, here's some clubs, go. You
Yeah.
want to make sure that there's some impetus and some interest from them to say, okay, I really want to try to go to this group and see what I can get out of there.
Hmm. So I'm going to pause here and engage our audience for a
Yeah.
moment. How many of you that have children believe that your children are experiencing some level of stress? And you can just give me a church finger or a hand or a thumbs up
Right.
or a thumbs down if
Mm.
they're not. So just in the comments, let me know how many of you believe that your children or child are experiencing some level of stress. All right. So Princess gave us a hand wave.
All right.
Miss Isis said absolutely. Isis was on with us Monday. Thank you.
Thank you for coming back, Isis.
Yeah, Ladon said, I think so. All right. E has his church finger up. He's on YouTube. All right. All right. Miss Jamil, she's here in Tallahassee. She's a clinician as well. Okay, so a number of people are saying they believe that their children under COVID. Yes.
Mm.
All right. Miss Cherry said yes. Not only stress, but some form of bullying.
Mm.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. So this is I guess more common than I maybe I realized.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you gave us some tips around an abusive type situation, as
Yeah.
well as the question around a young adult that had difficulty making friends.
hmm
What are some other ways that we can help our young people manage?
I think that, like a lot of things, part of it is going to start at home.
Mhm.
Um, and I say this very frankly, it's the first step is to check yourself, because if as the parent, um, they're gonna look to you a lot of times, even if it seems like they're not. They're watching you.
Mhm.
And if they can tell that you are not able to manage your emotions and your feelings well, a lot of times they'll either emulate that, or they'll feel lost not knowing how to be able to handle that. So the first step I always tell parents is be mindful about how you're managing your own emotions, and you want to make sure that you're having a good barometer about how to manage that. So a lot of these things that I say to kids about how to manage their emotions, adults should do them too. Um, and the first thing I always talk to kids about is about coping skills. So, and those can be really, really complicated or really simplistic. So, some people find that a coping skill is doing things like going to the gym, right? Or watching certain movies, or, and those require some sort of technology, or you getting out of the place. But sometimes a coping skill could be as simple as like, you know, deep breaths for 5 minutes. It could be just taking a 10-minute pause. It could be taking a 1-minute pause. Some people will do things like meditation and some of these other things that you can totally do internally and by yourself. They could be things like coloring or drawing or reading. So there's a vast sort of things that are coping skills. It's just a matter of finding which ones work best for you when you notice you're struggling with any sort of emotion, anger, sadness, anxiety, what have you. About the first step is really trying to find those coping skills that work. The second thing is that I tell a lot of people is figuring out what kind of behaviors you do or what your body shows you that gives you evidence that an emotion is something that you're struggling with. So, for example, anxiety tends to be the easiest one because everyone can see anxiety. Your heart beating faster, you're starting to sweat, your stomach hurts, you have a headache. It's good to be aware of some of those things that your body shows you to give you evidence of having anxiety or depression or anger. And so once you start to understand those things, then you can start using the coping skills to work that. So, for example, if you notice that even if it's beyond, like, people have heard of panic attacks where you have all these sort of symptoms together. But before it even gets there, if you notice that your heart's beating a little bit faster and that's showing you that anxiety is going on, then maybe that's a good point to take a stop on something and take a deep breath. And so if you're able to really connect an emotion to a behavior, you can start the coping skill faster. The third thing I tell people about are triggers. So some people notice that there are certain things that are in the environment that triggers them. It could be something really simple, like, you hear someone yelling. It could be something more complicated, such as like a certain environment or a certain amount of people. But if you have a good sense, again, of those triggers that cause you to be anxious or sad or angry, then again, you can take a coping skill and come in at it faster. So those are the three things I tell all people to do. Parents, adults in the kid's life, and the kids too. Like, if you have a good understanding of those three things, coping skills, what behaviors from an emotion, I call it behavior management, and then triggers, if you have a really good sense of those three things, it'll go a long way to be able to help you as an individual. And then because you're able to show the kid that you're doing these things, that's also really helpful.
No, those are all really good. I mean, we often talk about coping skills on here, different techniques that you can use to help manage your behavior and thoughts.
Yeah. And I always tell people to be a scientist with these coping skills because
Mhm.
the one doesn't work for everybody. So one of the things that we do, because I work in a hospital, is I'll hand over a list of literally 99 different coping skills.
Really?
Yes. And if you want, I could show it to you.
Yes, I want to see that.
Yes, I will email it to you. It's a literal list of 99 different coping skills. And sometimes, kids are like, oh my gosh, this is a whole bunch of them I could use when I get home. Sometimes they're like, okay, I don't see much here, but there are like 3 or 4 that I could try. I
Okay.
guarantee if there's a list of 99 things, you got to be able to find 2 or 3 that work for you.
Absolutely.
And the key about that is to be a scientist with it. Don't just try one and say, oh, that failed, and then screw it. What you want to try to do is sort of experiment with it. When you have a moment, when you notice a slight thing, like, again, like you're feeling a little anxious, try this coping skill, then try another one, then try another one. You may find in different levels of the emotion, different ones work. And there may be different times when different places, some works and some don't. So you want to be able to really be experienced in being a scientist with working through the coping skill. It sounds like some people even heard of the sheet.
Yeah, I said Isis was on Monday. She was on last Wednesday, and we talked about understanding therapy. She kind of broke down the process, but yeah, she's a clinician over in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, no, all of that is really good stuff. And yes, I definitely want that 99 coping skills list to share
Sure.
with you. So yeah. So my friend Michael Cork was on and he said, is it possible to not have stress? Seemingly it's all about managing stress.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
Yes. And I mean, I think it's important to think about it this way. remember, we as human beings weren't always like this, right? At some point in time, we were out in the wilderness and we had to hunt for our food and scavenge for food and plant food and things like that. And so, if you were living a life where you just had no stress and a lion approached you and you were as calm as a cucumber with that lion, you would be dead. So, stress is a very important thing. It is really about managing it because in many cases, stress can be really helpful. Because if you're in an environment with that lion and you don't feel stressed out, then you may not make it past that lion. So stress is really important. It's just really about finding ways to manage it and to make sure it's not overwhelming you or something that's causing you so much strife that it's debilitating you.
No, good point. So I'm gonna go to the viewers again and ask, are there some techniques or tools that you have used or skills that you have used to help your child manage stress? Is there something that you have used that you believe has worked well for your child?
Yeah.
All right. This is a safe space. This is an interactive conversation. So by all means, please feel free to share. We're learning from one another.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Princess said yes. Okay. And Princess, if you don't mind sharing, let us know what that is.
Yeah.
If you don't mind sharing. So while they're doing that, Dr. Chad, if you would, okay, she said meditation.
All right. Quick coming back. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If you would share some of what you are seeing, currently, as it relates to stress in the children, the adolescents that you're seeing. And
Yeah.
before you answer that question, hold on, let me see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he said breathing techniques. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
And there's different ways to do breathing techniques, by the way.
Ladon says some of the stress comes from the parents. For example, I sometimes coach youth sports, and parents are yelling at the kids like they're professionals. It's almost like the parents are counting on the kids to save the family.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, that could be very stressful. Okay, so yeah. Anything else? What are some of the things that you're seeing?
Sure. I work within the hospital, so I'm seeing them, unfortunately, at their greatest moment of crisis. So I see a lot of kids who are struggling with anxiety and depression to the point that they're having thoughts about hurting themselves in most instances. And I've also seen, not to specify diagnosis, but I've seen some people with what they call bipolar disorder, which is where they have these changes in moods that are from extremely elevated to very depressed. I also see some adolescents who are at the beginning of having things that could be deemed as schizophrenic. So seeing things, hearing things, delusions, like people feeling like people are coming after them or people are following them. I will say, over the years, the things that I see the most tend to be the depressed kids and the anxious kids. And it's an interesting battle that I always find that there's something correlative, and it seems to happen every year, about our numbers of kids coming into the hospital that increases during school and decreases during the summer. Now, yeah, and that tends to be pretty correlative. Like it tends to kind of run through pretty soon. Like, if they start school in January, we'll notice a little bit of an increase come February. And the same thing with the holidays, the summer, we'll notice that things will kind of start to die down, like, maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks after school ends. So it is very interesting. And I think there's two reasons for that. One, I think there is something about having a lot more eyes on the kid than maybe they did before. So, teachers are watching them, staff members are watching them. And so when they're struggling with something, there's more people who are noticing it. And obviously there's more professionals around to to comment on it and see it. So a lot of times that brings them into the hospital because more people see them. I
Right.
think also there is something about the transition back into school a lot of times, where they're just, they're coming off of somewhere where they have a little bit of freedom, and they're not always ready for the rigmarole and the intensity of school.
Hmm.
And sometimes that can really cause a lot of difficulty. So that's kind of what we've at least noticed in the hospital. But I would presume it's probably the same way even on the outside. I say on the outside with clinicians doing outpatient care, is
Right.
they're seeing probably a lot more anxiety and depression now than they have before.
Mm.
And I would guess their reasonings may not be necessarily school related or summer related. My guess is that to them, a lot more people are just being more comfortable with working on mental health. And so
So
they're just realizing, like, we've been kind of not worried about this kid for a long time, but something's up. Let's go have him see a therapist anyway.
yeah.
Versus 20, 30 years ago, it'd be like, no, you have to tough it out.
Hmm.
And so that's actually a good thing that people are feeling more comfortable with trying to go see people earlier and really trying to facilitate starting some of the help for their mental health.
Absolutely. So Lynette asks, are you seeing mostly minority children in the hospital?
So actually, no, I see a variety.
Okay.
I work in Montgomery County, and so there I'll see kids of all different races. I'll see African Americans, Latinx. We'll see Caucasian kids. We'll also see kids of different sorts of genders, a lot of
Mm.
non-binary, not just transgender, but non-binary,
Mm.
and also trying to understand their sexuality too. So people who are bisexual, gay and lesbian, or people who are just kind of trying to understand where they are. So we see a pretty even keeled, all sorts of people coming in. I haven't myself been able to see if there's excuse me, any sort of particular race that we see more often than another. It seems like they're all coming through.
Gotcha. So there was a question around the breathing technique that you
Sure.
mentioned. You mentioned that there are different breathing techniques for
Yeah.
coping. What are some of those?
So some of them are just as simple as just breathing in and out for, breathe in for 10 seconds or 5 seconds, breathe out for 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also this concept of sort of this square breathing. So you're using the breath at the same time as um sort of watching your hand kind of move. So, they'll say, okay, you want to breathe in as your hand moves up 5 seconds, you hold it as your hand goes across, you breathe out for 5 seconds as your hand's going down, and then you hold it for another 5 seconds. So that's sort of what they call square breathing. There's a lot of different sort of variations on that. The key about that is you're sort of using your hand in a way, or something that you're monitoring in a way, as you're breathing, to help you kind of focus as you're breathing. Some people will also do, through the use of meditation, they'll just kind of stare at a particular space or a particular thing in the room, and they'll just spend all their energy focusing on that as they're breathing in and out. I usually tell people, regardless of what breathing style you use, and there may be other ones people use, but that tends to be the variations. Whatever breathing style you use, I always find it helpful to tell adolescents and kids to count. So, count to 6 or count to 5 as you're breathing in and breathing out. That way it kind of gives you something to focus on rather than just like, you're like really focusing on how you're breathing. The other thing to think about too is it's not just a matter of inhaling and exhaling. It's a matter of taking a deep breath. So I always tell people not to just breathe in and breathe out, but try to breathe in and out to cause movement in your belly. So, you want to breathe into the point that your belly fully expands. You want to breathe in so your belly fully expands, breathe out so your stomach fully contracts. You really want to be mindful of using your entire breath as you're breathing as a source of relaxation.
Okay, thank you for those techniques.
Sure.
Jamil said, my go-to technique that I use with my clients is the 4-7-8 breathing method.
Hmm.
Okay, cool. There was a comment that I wanted to bring up. Michael Cork said, we try to teach our kids to not make a moment bigger than just that, a moment. Understanding that time gives opportunity for correction and redemption has helped. We can outlive most moments.
That's true. The key thing about that too, though, I think it's important to help kids understand that again that a moment is just a moment, but you also want to make sure that you're in the space with that moment.
Mm.
So it can happen many times, and again, we all do this. Like, just okay, it happened, move on. But what can happen for a lot of kids is that moment can mean a lot,
Mm-hmm.
even if it may mean very quote unquote little to you. It may mean a lot to them. So when they're having that moment where they're struggling with whatever experience they're having, yes, you do want to comment to the fact of, you remember, this won't last forever. We'll be able to do things to move forward, but you do want to also have the comment of, how do you feel about this moment?
Mm-hmm.
Because just in the space of talking through it, you could learn a lot about what kind of other thoughts they're having in the midst of this moment that may be causing them more stress in that moment.
Yeah, I definitely can recall as an adolescent um, feeling like everything just was so big. Like when
Yeah.
I say big, it's like it was like the end of the world, and it really wasn't, but it just
It
felt like
feels like it is.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's, especially those years of high school, it just feels like this is your life. And anything that changes in the midst of this can cause so much, friends moving away, having an argument with a friend, issues with a teacher. Like, it just feels like everything is riding on it
Mhm.
in high school. So yeah, we know now, past high school, that it's not that big of a deal. But while you're in it, it feels huge. So it's always important to recognize that feeling and to be able to have that conversation with the kid about how they feel about it and not sort of disregard it as something that could be over at some point.
Yes. Okay. Joy said, allow children the chance to actually feel instead
Agreed.
of stuffing it down. Yeah, I think a lot of suppression does happen.
Yep. And then the unfortunate part is, I don't see as many adult clients now, but when I did, the the Freudian sort of process about like what your parents do to you is what you struggle with as an adult.
Mm.
It's not always to that degree, but there are things that sometimes you haven't had the opportunity to feel through as a kid that you carry into adulthood. So it's really important that as you're feeling these things to kind of work through it, even with the adolescent.
Yeah, so Joy's what I consider to be a follow-up question is, so we should validate how they are feeling even if it seems not such a big deal to us adults.
Yes. To put simply, yes.
Okay.
It's really important to make sure that when, as an adult, you're sitting down with the, whether it's a child, or an adolescent, and they're sharing with you this something that to you seems so small, but to them seems so huge,
Mhm.
you want to try to treat it as big as they feel it. Because, if you try to treat it less than it makes it feel invalidating.
Yeah.
And by the process of you working with how they're feeling rather than how you think it should be, it creates a lot of avenues. One, for you to be able to better understand your kid. Two, it creates the opportunity for that kid to continue to come to you when they're struggling. And three, it creates an opportunity for both of you to learn how to work through that problem.
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. I actually can see that happening in adults that didn't receive validation as youth, and so they struggle as
Yep.
adults.
Yep. Yep.
Wanting acceptance and recognition and all of that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, we had a question from Jackson. What is your
Listen, Jackson.
approach when it comes to children who are experiencing an early case of becoming transgender?
Mm-hmm.
Do you treat these children cases differently than straight kids?
Yes and no. You know, no, if they're coming to me in terms of just what is depression or anxiety or what have you, I would treat them the same way to every other kid, of allowing them to have the opportunity to process how they're feeling, working through that, and of course, trying to find the needed professional to help them with that. But we recognize, though, that many kids who are specifically struggling with that piece of how to work through things when it comes to, understanding what it means to be transgendered, or what it means to understand what they are, because they may not be able to call it transgendered, but there's a sense that they feel like their body and their mind are not simpatico, like they're not where it should be. There are professionals out there who deal specifically with that, by the way. There's many psychiatrists and therapists who work specifically with transgendered youth.
Mhm.
But those may be things where you are going to treat a little bit differently. You do have to be mindful about where they are in their journey. Some people are in the process of just thinking about it, and so they're not really ready to talk to everybody about it. You as an adult may be the second to last one to know, honestly. They
Mhm.
may have like worked it out with their friends a little bit. They may have friends who call them by their gendered name, whether it be male or female, although they're the opposite gender or what have you. And so that's the point where you really just want to, again, it's really more of working with where they are at that level. So it may just be a lot of just talking to them about where they are with that experience, if it's something that they really worry about. If on the other end they've figured it out, many times they're trying to figure out how to come out to their parents. So I treat that as not a job of mine. I don't, meaning I'm not the one who should be telling the parent about it.
Gotcha.
My goal is to help the kid to figure out how to be able to process that in a way that when they're ready, they can
Mhm.
come out on their own terms. Because it could be, speaking of invalidating, it could be very invalidating if, as the clinician, I'm the one who's coming out to them rather than the child themselves.
Right.
And so it's really so that is the different part, where your job is not to kind of just push them into hurry up and tell them,
Yeah.
no. Your job is to help them work through the process and figure out the best way to be able to approach that with friends and family. So that's where it's a little different.
Yeah. Um, Isis J said they
Excuse
are
me.
humans with their own emotions. A child who feels seen and understood lights up in a different way.
Hmm.
And so I do agree that most people, even youth, just want to be heard and understood. Heard and understood. Jamil said, I'm working with a young adult client now who is struggling to find her voice in her words. My feelings have never been validated, always brushed under the rug.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that something you see a lot of?
And I'll see that um a lot of times. Like it's and again, I don't think it's ever done on purpose. Like, a client I had recently commented that she's always felt unheard, and she felt like it started when her sister was born, and at the same time the parents were doing a lot of arguing.
Mhm.
And again, I don't think it was the intention of the parents. They were probably just struggling with the stress of having a new child, struggling with the stress of having their own relationship, and in the midst of all that strife and struggle, they weren't able to be as attentive to the at that time child as she
Right.
would want to be. So, um, there, that does happen where people feel like they're not being heard, and that leads to issues in childhood, and dare I say, it can lead to issues in adulthood too. Of because they don't always feel like they were being heard as a child, that same process continues. And so they're looking into people that they can go to that can help them feel like they're being heard. And that's a way that they feel wanted, is to know that they're being heard by that person.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So let me ask you this.
Mhm.
how would you, outside of, say anxiety, depression, recognize that your child is having a more serious mental health issue?
I think the key is I always tend to think of things in threes, so this might end up being another thing I think in threes. So I think the first thing is I talked earlier about being sort of that person who is communicating with the child and allowing them to be open and communicate with you. So that's the first step of where things should go. And when you notice that they're talking more about things that are concerning and troubling, that's when you might want to seek out to be a professional. And again, it doesn't have to be to the degree of like they're feeling suicidal all the time. It could just be that the way they're talking about things seems really negative. They feel like they're having a lot more struggles than usual in their conversation. So that's one. Two, a lot of times we'll hear, as I said, from school. So if you're noticing they're going to school or they're doing their schoolwork and things just seem to be way harder than they used to be, maybe they spend a lot of time in the nurse's office. Maybe there are, it's not just one class, but a plethora of classes that they're just not able to focus. That may be another point to be able to talk to a professional. And then thirdly, sometimes people can note it just from behaviors. So, as a parent myself, one of the things I always want to try to get to the point of where I can somewhat understand my child. Like you'll never fully understand them, but you want to get to the point where you feel like you have a good understanding. And so when you start to notice things that are different, they may not tell you, but you may see it. So, maybe they're spending less time outside of their room than they did before, or they're not hanging out with friends as much, or you notice that, there used to be a time where a thing that you and your child have done a lot, even coaches, there's something that you and that other person, that youth that you've been mentoring do a lot, and they're just not as interested in doing it anymore. And you're noticing that a lot. That may be another time to bring up a point where, do you think we should kind of talk to a professional about what's going on here? I always like to think at a baseline is if you notice things are different to the point where they're debilitating,
Mm,
that's the point that you want to go talk to somebody.
okay. Okay. All good stuff. Um, you know, the things that maybe as parents, because of the busyness of our lives, may get overlooked.
Yeah.
So just something that you want to definitely pay attention to, if they're very negative, if they're struggling in their conversations, if school is becoming much harder than it used to be in these behavior changes.
Yeah.
They're not doing the normal things that they used to do.
And I always tell parents too, part of what we do in the hospital before we discharge a patient, I say our client, we set up what's called safety planning meetings. And part of that is really about, making sure you lock away knives and, and you're securing the medication, things like that. But the other part of it, and I find in some way a little bit more important, is communication, and that could be as easy as, okay, how do we know that you're doing bad? Is there something you can tell us to give us a sense that something's going off? It could be even more simplistic if you're not thinking about someone who just came from the hospital. It can be just a matter of, okay, at dinner time, let's make it a point to talk to the kid about how they're doing. And not just fine, which is the typical answer an analyst will give you, but a little bit more detailed than that, or maybe once a week or once every other week, you as a parent will spend a little bit of personal time with that kid just to check in and see how they're doing. I think that's an also really important part of the end result, which is knowing when something's a little off, is trying to have as many sort of opportunities to be able to check in.
Love it. Love it. So I like the safety plan idea. I kind of got um, a little exposure with that a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Was in a situation where we're trying to assist someone and recommended a safety plan. So I think I had not really heard of those before, and I think
Yeah.
that as a parent being able to come up with something where you can check in with the person and they agree to it, something that you can make a request and ask them if they are willing to comply with that request,
Hmm.
and actually following up and following through with it. So
Yeah. And I think the biggest part of the safety plan is who you communicate with. As I'm kind of looking at the chats, one of the things I commented on is communicating with a teacher, a mentor, or a coach. It's going to be very helpful if, and part of our safety plan is to talk about people that you can communicate with and that we can reach out to as well.
right.
So, that may be a teacher, that may be a mentor, that may be really close friends, because like I said, adolescents will tell more to their friends than they'll ever tell you.
Yeah.
But at least those close friends. Not to say that you're always going to pry and get into their business, because that's not going to help you. But
Right.
at least if something's up, you can say, "Hey, we talked about having a safety plan as people that you and I can talk to, including your friends, when I feel like something's not okay."
Right.
And so, I reached out to them as we talked about, and they commented on some things that they're worried about. And so you really want to make sure, as part of that safety plan, that not only you having an understanding of how to communicate together, but who you can communicate with to help support your concerns.
I love that. I love that. I'm gonna one more again just reach out to the viewers. How many of you are familiar with safety plans or have used a safety plan before? Just a thumbs up, finger wave. Safety plans. Let us know. Have you heard of safety plans or used safety plans before? All right. We got a question from Jackson,
Yeah,
and
Jackson is rolling with these.
Jackson
Thank
is
you.
Jackson is rolling. Yes, about whether or not when is a child too far gone.
Hmm. Obviously, extreme examples like we've seen these days, unfortunately, can be very frightening. I find it sad over the years that school shootings have become familiar.
Yeah.
And many kids now are used to having drills of a school shooting. So that's kind of scary for me that that's become more and more prevalent. So to get into your question, those are sort of the things that we worry about, is kids who are planning on harming a great many people, obviously. It's kind of hard to say too far gone based on what.
Right.
So I think any child, regardless of the severity of what they're dealing with, whether it's really harming themselves severely, planning on how to harm other people, becoming extremely physically violent to other people, becoming extremely psychotic so that they can't. I think at any point of their journey, there's always a space for help if they're willing.
Okay.
It's just a matter of finding what they're willing and what they want to work on. So, even a kid who has gone on a shooting spree and killed lots of people, there may be something behind that. It may not be just this random, like, I'm just going to start killing people. It may be even to that point of not being heard. There may be something to that, and so, obviously there's the legal things that they have to go through, that they'll be arrested and all these sort of things. But I think there may be some avenue into which, and that's why, unfortunately, the greatest point of mental health is in our legal system and in our jail system, especially for adults. Like, there is probably more mental health workers, psychiatrists, therapists that work in jails than work out in the field, and that's because a lot of these folks, the reason why they're coming to this point is because they're struggling with some sort of mental health issue. So that's why I say, as long as they're willing, there's no real definition of being far gone. Obviously, there's some kids who are not willing, and you have to try to figure out if there's something that they can latch onto, or is this just a process you'll constantly be working at, constantly be trying to understand.
Mhm.
So, it's like I said, far gone for what is my question. I
Right.
think everybody, even if their willingness is as small as a mustard seed,
Mm.
there's a willingness.
All right. They can turn it around. Okay. I love that.
Mhm.
All right. Well, we are coming to the close of our conversation.
Mhm.
So, is there anything else that you would like to share? Any last or parting words for the viewers?
um, well, if I can have any takeaways on my end, um, one thing I just want to continue to push for is um, the three things about how to manage behaviors. Number one, coping skills, understanding your triggers, and understanding your behaviors. Two, if you want the kid to be able to do these things, you got to be able to do it yourself. And then thirdly, always be open to that communication piece. Even when it feels like the thing that they're worried about is really small, to them it's really big. So allow that as an opportunity to talk through their struggles, to have a better sense of what is leading them there, and to talk together about how to help them work through it.
Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yes. So, I hope you all have found this to be beneficial. I'm not going to ask Dr. Chad about how we connect with him because he doesn't have his own practice and he, is at the hospital. But you may find him on social somewhere, or on another show like mine, talking about various sundry things because you do give talks and do articles and things of that nature. So. This was really good. I definitely want to get that list of 99 things
Yes, I will
to
send it to you.
do. Yeah, look, you on record, all right?
Right. I'm on public record. I will send it. You will have it.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. So we're getting a lot of good feedback from folks saying great points, saying great job. Jackson said, thank you so much, Chad. All right, you all were a great audience too, as well.
Yes, thank you very much for all your questions.
Yes, good questions. Good questions. Again, we're trying to normalize the conversation around mental health and wellness and get you all to connect with a counselor, a therapist. Have your children connect with a counselor, or therapist if you think that they need to.
And definitely with communities of color, this is a thing that's always been an issue. I'm glad that I'm seeing more and more people of color interested in mental health, but this is
Absolutely.
not something to be ashamed of. Once you know that something is going on, as what's being quoted, Black people need therapy too. And so
Yes,
it's
they
just
do.
important. Once you know something's going on, just reach out. There's no reason to be ashamed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Ozzy said he's looking forward to the 99.
Yes, thank you.
The pressure is on.
I know, I tell you.
The pressure is on. Okay, cool. Well, before we go, I'll mention our guest for next week, Monday. Our resident substance abuse and misuse clinician is on. Floyd Joy Cornelius will be back talking about addiction recovery and finding purpose. This is part 2 to uh, his first conversation. And then on Wednesday, we have Dr. Angela Henderson, and we will be talking about finding joy. So, finding joy, Black joy is like a thing now. So, finding joy. So, I definitely, for those of you who are new to this space, want to invite you to subscribe to the Conversations with Nicole YouTube channel. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and on Roku TV. So if you have a Roku TV player or a stick, Greater Works Network. Greater Works Network is the network. You can watch us streaming live on Mondays and Wednesdays at 8:30 and on demand. So this episode will be on demand on GWN or Roku TV. So got to put in that plug. All right. So thank you again, Dr. Chad. Thank you again, viewers. Y'all have a great weekend. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next time. Peace.